Hey friends, and welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Morgan, and today I am so excited to take you along with me and show you how I make my super easy fancy bread, homemade brioche bread. I feel like there's kind of two different types of people in this world. There's people that can cook, and then there's people that can bake. And I have always struggled with baking. I love cooking because I can be creative, but baking, you really have to follow a recipe and you have to stay within the lines or else it's not gonna work very well. So I have struggled with finding my personal favorite bread recipe. That's why I think if I can make this bread recipe, you can make this bread recipe. And I'm so excited because it's brioche, so people kind of think you're already a little bit fancy. I want to take you along, show you how I make this homemade brioche bread, and without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so I'm just using my bread maker pan, and I am not actually going to make my bread in the bread maker. I literally just put all of the ingredients in here, let it mix it around and make the dough for me, and then we're gonna bake it in the oven without the bread maker. So if you don't have a bread maker, seriously, no problem at all. You're gonna follow the exact same instructions. You're gonna do the exact same thing, and you can use your KitchenAid with the bread hook on it. You can use your hands and make the dough and just knead it a lot. There's a ton of different options. You definitely don't have to have the bread maker, but definitely if you don't have a bread machine, still follow these exact same steps and it's gonna be perfect. First thing you're gonna do is get 1 cup of water. You want this to be warm water. It should be between about 104 and 110 degrees. So we're gonna dump that in. And if you are using a bread machine, make sure you have the paddle in the bottom. Then I have 3 tablespoons of warm milk. Again, you want this to be the same temperature as the water, between 104 and 110-ish degrees. Too cold, it won't let the yeast do its thing. Too hot, and it will kill the yeast. So just make sure you're being pretty careful with that. Next, I'm gonna add in 2 eggs. These are just eggs from our chickens. And these are room temperature that I'm putting in because these are just eggs that I collected from our chickens earlier this morning and I just left them on the counter. Then you're going to do 2.5 tablespoons of butter softened. And I mean softened, not melted. We'll call that 2.5 tablespoons. And I know this seems funny because I literally just winged it, but baking and bread, you gotta make sure your measurements are pretty exact other than the flour. Everything else needs to be pretty exact, but we're gonna be fine. Then I'm gonna use 1.5 teaspoons of salt. I just use this Redmond's Real Salt. I absolutely love this stuff. It's mined in Utah, so it's super local. It comes from underground, I believe, so there's not any pollutants mixed into it. I think it's really good. Highly recommend it. Then we're going to do 2.5 tablespoons of just white sugar. And then 3 cups of bread flour. And remember, when you're measuring your flour, you want to make sure to spoon it into the cup. Don't dip the cup in the bucket because that's going to be packed measurements. And we want this to be fluffy measurements. So that is what it's looking like. You can see we've got the liquid at the bottom and then the flour on top. And then I like to just make a little indent in the flour and then just a little crevice hole thing there. And then I put the yeast right there and it'll all get mixed in. I just find that works pretty well for me. So now I'm gonna take this over and we are going to stick this in the bread machine and it's going to just knead the dough for me, get it all mixed up and then knead it for about 15 or so minutes. If you don't have a bread machine, this is where you're gonna put it in your KitchenAid. You're just gonna use the bread hook, and if you're using your hands, you're just gonna start kneading. So if you are using a bread machine, you're just gonna pop the pan in like that. And then, at least on mine, I just go to select and I wanna go all the way down to this dough. Right there, no extras, 24 minutes. Start. Okay, so I just opened this up and saw that it was looking a little bit too liquidy still. We want this to look like a dough, not quite this liquidy. So all I'm gonna do is add about 1/4 of a cup of flour at a time and let it keep mixing, and that should help kind of thicken this up. And you guys apologize, I see what the issue was. My recipe is 3.5 cups of bread flour. I only did 3, so 3.5 is correct. And I will link the recipe or post the recipe down in the description box below, so you can definitely find it there and have all of the exact measurements. Here is what our dough is looking like. I'm super happy with it. It's still a little bit sticky, but I find that to be absolutely perfect. There's about 6 minutes left on the kneading cycle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop over to the oven and we are going to turn it on, and then that will give the bread a warm environment in order to proof. I apologize, it's so loud with the bread machine, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn, so I have this warm/proof button on mine. This is way too hot for bread, for me at least. It might work for you, it does not work for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to bake, 350 degrees, and start. I'm going to let the oven preheat for a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to turn it off, completely turn it off. I'm going to turn the oven light on, and then I will let the bread rise in the oven for about an hour. Okay, so I let this preheat a little bit. I'm going to turn that off and open up the door, let it cool down for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to put the bread in the oven. Okay, I just pulled this out of the oven where it was rising, and as you can see, this has definitely grown in size. So what I'm gonna do is just get a little bit of flour, sprinkle my work surface, and then get a little bit on my hands. Make sure your hands are very super clean. And I'm gonna turn the dough out. And I'm just gonna knead it just a little bit just to kind of punch it down. But we don't want it to lose any of its fluff. So what I like to do is just kind of shape it, make a little ball. That, and then make sure it's going down on a floured surface or you will have a lot of regrets. And you can see this, it's just super soft, and when I push it, it just totally bounces back. That's how we know it's ready to go. Now I'm just going to take my knife and cut this into 3 equal-ish parts. If you have a bench scrape, you can definitely use that now, but knife works just fine. And make sure you're keeping your dough on a floured surface because this dough is pretty darn sticky. All right, then I'm just going to take each of these and just roll it into kind of long logs, and then we're going to braid it. In the meantime, make sure your oven is turned up to 350 degrees and 3. Then I'm just going to lay them out like so, stretch them just a little bit. And I'm going to basically braid them. Basically, we're just gonna braid like you would hair. Sometimes I get a little confused, so just keep in mind like you're braiding hair, one over the other. And then when you get to the end, we're just gonna pinch and then roll it under. So pinch it all together and then just kind of roll it under. So your loaf should look like this. And then you're just going to take a regular loaf pan. I like to spray mine. You definitely shouldn't need to. I either put parchment paper down or I spray mine. And then we're just gonna transfer this into the pan. And that's what it looks like. I'm gonna let this sit here and it's gonna rise for another probably 10 to 20 minutes. I'll probably put it back in the oven and let it just stay warm. And then we're gonna come through, egg wash it, and then cook it on 350 degrees for 15-ish minutes. All right, here is my loaf, all egg washed. I'm gonna go throw it in the oven for about 15 minutes on 350 degrees. I just pulled the bread out of the oven. Oh, here it is. Doesn't that look so good? So you can tell it's done when, see how it just sounds pretty ready. And then look at how like flaky the top of that is. Oh my gosh, it smells so good. Our whole house smells like a bakery. First, I need to let this cool for quite a bit. Bread is one of those things you want it to cool all the way before you're cutting it. Obviously, warm bread is delicious, so you can, you know, leave it a little bit warm. And then we'll cut into it and I'll show you what the center looks like. Okay, you guys, here is the final bread, and it is just literally, it's like store-bought. It's just so moist. It's so light and fluffy and airy. If you give this recipe a try, please tag me and let me know what your thoughts are. I hope it's as great of a success for you as it has been for me. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing, and we will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.